Hi there. So today we're going to see how you guys did with Caesar lines 52 through 60, and then tell you what you're doing for the weekend. So should be pretty straightforward today. Let's take a look at how you translated these lines. I think I liked doing it this way. I randomly assigned a line for each of you, and that seemed to be good. So let's go ahead and see. And where are we in the narrative? So the Helvetians they're just about to set out, and they've gathered these other tribes who are going with them, and yeah, they're about to set out. So that's where we are. So first line here, 52 in your text. Will had this one. So erant omnino itinera duo quibus itineribus domo exire possent. So Will said there were altogether 2 routes by which they would be able to go. And that's right. That's a good translation. So let's break it down. So main verb, there were. This is just to be in the imperfect, existentially used. Omnino, this is a funny word, but it's an adverb, and you can probably tell it's related to omnis, the adjective that means all. So we can take it as meaning altogether, or in all there were itinera duo. So itinera, this is the third declension neuter noun, iter, itineris. And so since it's neuter, this A tells us nominative plural. Duo is a numerical adjective. So if you look this up, you've gotten that it means 2. These numerical adjectives usually don't decline. So in the dictionary, it'll abbreviate indeclinable form. Okay, so that's nice. So it agrees with itinera. So there were altogether 2 routes. And now we've seen iter mean way, going, these kinds of things. Here routes make sense. Will did it nicely. Okay, so there were altogether 2 routes. That's our main clause. Now, we have some kind of a relative clause next, right? Quibus, relative pronoun. And our verb then is possent in the relative clause. This is going to be a relative clause of characteristic, a new thing. Yes, and you would have had to see the footnote on this line, which it looks like Will did because he translated it correctly. But quibus to possent, relative clause of characteristics, translated as roots by which they would be able. Okay, so what is a relative clause of characteristic? Well, we've seen purpose clauses with ut, right? And then we've seen relative clauses of purpose. So relative pronoun with the verb in the subjunctive. And then remember, a normal old relative clause is going to be relative pronoun, indicative verb. Now, this is the same setup as a relative clause of purpose. It's just a different thing. So again, the name for this is a relative clause of characteristic, and it refers to the type of thing something is. It has this generalizing force. So in this context, the relative pronoun quibus refers to these roots, itinera, and they're roots by which they would be able to go, just like Will did it. The sense of quibus, though, is that they're the kind of routes that these Helvetians would be able to travel on. In general, they're the sort of routes that would work. And I think we'll see more of these as we go along, so you'll get familiar with them. But again, they have that sense. So he was the kind of man who would always forget to do the dishes. That'd be like a relative clause of characteristic in English. The kind of thing, the kind of person in general who would do this or that, as opposed to an indicative relative clause where it would be like, he is a man who forgot to do the dishes. Fact. That's a different thing than saying he's the kind of man who would. Okay? And there's no way by construction to tell them apart from a relative clause of purpose. You have to try these out in context. So with the main clause, there were 2 routes. There's not, like, a relative clause of purpose wouldn't work here. 2 routes in order that they might travel by them. It doesn't work. So having both these possibilities with relative pronoun and verb in the subjunctive, possent, back up, I guess, is an imperfect subjunctive. So posse is the infinitive of that verb, sum possum, with an ending on it. So relative clause plus subjunctive can either be of purpose or of characteristic, and here it's characteristic. So there were altogether two roots, and they're roots by which, this is sort of a ablative of means idea, roots by which they would be able to go out from their home. And domo is a finicky kind of noun too. It's basically an ablative idea of separation. You go away from something in the ablative. Okay, not to talk that one to death though, because Will did a fine job on it. Next one, Liam. It looks like he left us hanging, so I'll translate this. So unum persequanos angustum et difficile inter montem Uram et flumen Rodanum. Oh, I think Liam works on Friday. That's right. So we'll forgive him. But we've got now unum. It's going to be he's going to be talking about these two roots. So unum and then alterum in the next sentence. These are neuter. They refer to itinera. So two roots, one of which, and iter is neuter. That's why unum is in the neuter here. So two routes by which they would be able to go. One route per sequanos, through the sequani. I think the meaning is through the territory of the sequani. And this route, so one, angustum et difficile. So both adjectives are neuter and refer to unum, as well as this implied iter that unum looks back to. So through the territory of the sequani, narrow and difficult, inter montem Uram et flumum Rodanum. Now we've seen inter mean different things. Here we can take it as between. So a route narrow and difficult between Mount Ura and the Rhone River. So between those two things. Inter takes the accusative. It's governing both sides of this thing. Okay, so that's one of these routes. And looks like Rosemary had the next sentence. Alterum per provinciam nostram, multo facilius. One traversing through our province, I punish easily. So good on the first half. The second part's tricky, and it's something we haven't seen. So I don't blame you for that. So we had unum in Liam's sentence. Now we have alterum. So one and another. Alter. You should think alter ego. Alternative are English derivatives from that adjective. So another per provinciam nostrum, through our province. So one route through the sequani, one through our province. Now, multo facilius, this is an interesting little construction, and I gave you a footnote on it. So multo is here what we call an ablative of comparison, okay? And facilius, this is something we did a couple months ago, so you might not have remembered, but recall that for adjectives, you have the positive degree, comparative degree, and then superlative. To form the comparative degree of Latin adjectives, you're going to add for masculine and feminine forms IOR. So we would have something like facilior if we wanted, like, I don't know, a path easier than, something that would be masculine or feminine. Now, neuter, you add IUS. Okay, and this is neuter because the thing that's easier is this alterum iter, the other path, which the implied noun is neuter. So what we have with facilius is the comparative degree, the neuter comparative degree of facilis, easy. So the other, through our province, implied verb to be, is easier. Okay, so easier. Now, when you have comparative ideas, we can modify them with adjectives in the ablative. So we would do this as easier by much, or a lot easier. Okay, and multa would be an ablative of comparison. We could have a like parvo too, easier by a little. You see, not a huge thing, but again a neat little construction here. So that's how we would do that. So the other road through our province, easier by far. All right, next one for Hammond. Looks like he hasn't gotten back to us yet either. That's okay. But we've got nam facile transire potuerant Rodanum, qui fluit inter fines Helvetiorum et Alabrogum, qui nuper ab Romanis pacati erant. Tricky one. I'm gonna have to look up a few words in this one too, but let's take it left to right. So nam, we can just say for, you know, just an introductory word here. For, let's take our main verb, potuerant. This is perfect from possum posse. For they were able transire, to go through. That's usually what that means. Transire, to pass, to go through. They were able easily to go through Rhodanum. So this should be the Rhine River. Oh, and pardon me, I'm taking facile as an adverb too, that short E adverb ending for regular adjectives. So they were easily able to go through the Rhone, to cross the Rhone. Now, qui, I know this relative clause is going to be looking back to Rhodanum, which is masculine. So the Rhone which fluit, which flows. The Rhone which flows inter fines Helvetiorum, between the boundaries of the Helvetians, the borders of the Helvetians, and at Allabrogum. So let's back up a little bit. Right, you're good with the relative clause. This is a normal relative clause here. Verb in the indicative. It's just giving us parenthetic information about the river. So the Rhone River, which flows, and now inter is going to govern fines, and then fines in turn is modified by both of these genitive plurals. So which flows between the boundaries, between the borders of the Helvetians on the one hand, and of the Allobrogi, however you say the name of that tribe. And again, this is Allabrogum is a third declension people's name. So this is genitive plural, even though it looks accusative. And it looks like we've got another relative clause, qui. I think our antecedent is still going to be Rhodanum. So the Rhone, which flows between those peoples, and which, now nuper, that's the word I can't remember very well. Newly, lately, okay. And which lately, okay. So let's slow down here. Pakati, pardon me, I somehow skipped this sentence when I was preparing. So paco, the verb means subdue, subdue, bring into a state of peace and quietness, to make peaceful, pacify. And this is the participle. Okay, so we've got a nominative plural perfect passive participle. So I'm going to back up. Qui now is not going to have the Rhone as its antecedent. That was a mistake. It's going to look back to Allobrogi. So, and this, I'm just taking it because it's proximal, it's nearest, it's nearer this than Helvetiorum, if that makes sense. So, in between the borders of the Helvetians and the Allobrogi, who recently, now this is, we can take as a parenthetic verb form. See how this works out? Pakati erant. So what do we get when we have a perfect passive participle and an imperfect form of the verb to be? This is pluperfect passive, and it's third plural, so we can take it as agreeing with our relative pronoun. So the Allobrogi, who had been subdued recently by the Romans. And then we can take ab Romanis as an ablative of personal agent. Okay, really tricky. But the whole sentence, for they were able easily to go over the Rhone, to cross the Rhone, which flows between the boundaries of the Helvetians and the Allobrogi, who recently had been subdued by the Romans. Okay, tough one. So next, Abby had extremum oppidum Allabrogum proximumque Helvetiorum finitibus est Genava. So Abby said the farthest town of the Allabrogum, which is closest to the Helvetians, is Geneva. Really close, really close. So let's see. Our subject here is going to be oppidum, town, neuter, and our verb is just to be, est. So the town is, and then we can take this place name as being a predicate nominative to oppidum. So our bare bones sentence here is the oppidum est Geneva. The town is Geneva. Okay, and then we've just got a couple adjectival phrases modifying the town. So it's the town extremum, that means furthest from, or furthest, pardon me, not furthest from. The furthest town, and it's now Allobrogium is genitive plural. We can take it as the furthest town of the Allobrogi, of those people, and the nearest town we've got finitibus, so borders, boundaries in the plural, nearest to the boundaries of the Helvetians is Geneva, right? Let's make sure that makes sense. The furthest town of the Allobrogi and the nearest to the boundaries of the Helvetians is Geneva. Okay, let's check our translation here and make sure that that's the right sense of it. The furthest town of the Allobrogis and the nearest to the territories of the Helvetii is Geneva. Okay, so I was doing that appropriately. Remains to be seen what the significance of that is, but that's how it works out. Proximum and extremum both agree with oppidum, and yeah, Allobrogum modifies oppidum. It's the town of the Allobrogi. And then Helvetiorum modifies finitibus, the boundaries of the Helvetians. Okay, and last one here, Riverhead. So ex eo oppido pons ad Helvetios pertinent. The bridge reached out of the town toward the Helvetians. Good. Good. Okay, not sure how to fit eo, third person pronoun, into this. Great question, and this is something we haven't seen, but we can explain it real quick. So ao is usually just the pronoun. We've seen a couple times this demonstrative pronoun, hic, haec, hoc, which means this, these. Now, sometimes Latin will use the third person pronoun as what we call a demonstrative adjective. So if I say something like the computer mouse or this mouse, right, the one I have, that's a demonstrative adjective. This class, those students. It's when you're pairing a demonstrative pronoun with another noun and using it like an adjective. So that's what's going on here, and it's neuter ablative singular to agree with oppido. So ex eo oppido, we can take that as one phrase. From this town. From this town, and the town we're talking about is Geneva, this furthest town of the Allobrogi, and the one nearest to the borders of the Helvetians. So from this town, and now Pons is our subject, just like River did in her translation. From this town, a bridge, pertinet, stretches out toward the Helvetians. And let me just make sure pertineo. Yeah, it's pertineo. That's indicative. So nothing funky there. It is a neat use of the verb though, because we've seen pertineo as being like the English sense of the sense of the English derivative. Pertain to, have relevance to. Here it's physical, it's a literal meaning, right? The bridge stretches out, okay? It stretches out toward the Helvetians from this town. So we've got the Rhone River. This town, Geneva, is on the Rhone in the territory of the Allobrogi. There's a bridge stretching out from Geneva toward the Helvetian territory, okay? And so that's how ao fits in. It's a demonstrative adjective, from this town. So good job with those of you who answered. Again, these are tricky sentences, just a process of puzzling them together. You get better at reading this stuff by doing it. Now, for the weekend, I actually think it'd be nice to take a couple days off for you. So if you need to catch up on other classes, something like that, you can do it. Now, if you're in good shape, what I'm going to do is read like 2 more lines so we can get to the end of the next section. But I'm going to suggest that you go back through everything we read in Caesar and just buzz back through it. That'd be an awesome thing to do to start preparing for your exam. I mean, if you do that this weekend and then 2 more times before the exam, you'll ace it, I'm sure. So I'm going to read a couple more lines to you and then we'll let you go. So from the beginning of what we did here today, there were altogether 2 routes by which they would be able to go away from their home. One through the Sequani, narrow and difficult, between Mount Jura and the Rhone River. The other through our province, easier by far. And our province is, from Caesar's point of view, the Roman province. Easier by far, for they were able easily to cross the Rhone, which flows between the borders of the Helvetians and of the Allobrogi, who recently had been put down by the Romans. The furthest town of the Allobrogi, and the one nearest to the borders of the Helvetians, is Geneva. From this town, from Geneva, a bridge stretches out toward the Helvetians. A bridge reaches over the river toward the Helvetians. And now a couple new lines here. Itaque Helvetii per fines Allobrogum ire constituerunt. And so the Helvetians were able, or they decided, that's the sense of constituerunt. The Helvetians decided, ire, to go through the borders, or through the boundaries of the Allobrogi, through the Allobrogian territory. Cum omnes res ad perfectionem comparaviscent. So this is another one of those circumstantial cum clauses. So when, and here's our pluperfect subjunctive verb, when they had prepared omnes res, when they had prepared all things ad perfectionem, for departure. Now, ad with the accusative in these kinds of constructions can take on this sort of weak sense of purpose. It's not really a purpose clause, but I'm going to translate it and it'll sound like purpose. Realize the Latin is ad with the accusative. So when they had prepared all things for departure, diem dixerunt. So this is an idiom. I give you a footnote on it. Literally, they said the day, but that's like they appointed a day. Okay, they named the day. When they had prepared all things for departure, they named the day. Now we have qua die, relative. This is going to be a relative clause of characteristic again. Qua die convenirent, imperfect subjunctive. They named the day, the sort of day on which they would convene ad ripum rodani. Omnes too. So the day on which they would all convene ad ripam, on the bank of the Rhone, okay? On the bank of the Rhone. So qua die, again, it's kicking off a relative clause of characteristic, but it's also an ablative of time when. Remember, we talked about temporal uses with the cases. The ablative is used for naming the day on which, or the day when something happens. So when they had prepared all things for departure, they named the day on which they would all convene on the bank of the Rhine, toward the bank of the Rhine. Okay, so we'll go back over things on Monday. Again, read through all, how many lines have we done? Like 60 lines or whatever it is. Read through them over the weekend if you have time, and just see if you can go through the Latin without looking anything up. And if you need to look something up, look it up. But try to just read the Latin without looking into translation, and that's the best practice you can do for the kind of exam I'm going to give you. Trust me, just go through the lines we're reading together. I mean, we're going to get through maybe 100 by the time we get to the end of next week. So if you can review what we've done this week over the weekend, then next weekend before we get into exams, you can read the new stuff over again, and you'll be more than ready for the exam. So that'd be my advice. Other than that, no formal homework for the weekend. So we will talk to you on Monday. Have a great weekend. God bless.